Welcome to Artificially Intelligent Marketing, a weekly podcast where we stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, helping you get the best results from your marketing efforts. Now let's join our hosts, Paul Avery and Martin Broadhurst.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Artificially Intelligent Marketing's Paul Avery here, as usual, joined by the fantabulous Martin Broadhurst. Martin, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Unlike the weather outside, which is gloomy, miserable, very, very December. Generally speaking, no, I'm good.
The weather is frightful, but the podcast is extremely delightful. So everyone's a winner. We got some really interesting stuff to talk about this week. I mean, last couple of weeks have been crazy. So what we got on the docket today?
A few new models have been released. You might have slept on this, Paul. I know you've been very busy, but Google have released Gemini 3 Pro and the exciting Nano Banana Pro. Anthropic responded with their own release of Opus 4.5. Away from model releases, we've had Gartner releasing their 2026 strategic predictions, which you'll be unsurprised to hear contains some AI mentions. I know, I was shocked. Google have started rolling out ads in AI overviews, and there's some rumours flying around that ChatGPT might be looking at doing something similar in their system. And Adobe has purchased SEMrush.
Lots going on then. Lots going on. Well, let's get into that first one. I mean, it's been the model week, isn't it? Gemini 3 came out and we started playing with it instantly and we were like, oh, this is decent. All of the evals look very good, but as we're finding mostly in our own work, you have to test your own use cases. You can't massively trust too many evals at this point, at least in my experience. And then, Opus 4.5 comes straight out, and there was who is winning, and then GPT 5.1 as well. So lots going on. Take us through what Google's been up to.
So Google was sitting at the top of the leaderboards with Gemini 2.5 for a long time. And then there were some rumors flying around that 3 would be coming out. Certainly the X.com discussions and Reddit boards were awash with speculation. And then, they launched a new model, Gemini 3 Pro, which we think will be followed by Gemini 3 Flash, the lightweight version, the kind of not reasoning model soon. But it came out and smashed the leaderboards. It was a real leap as well. I think sometimes there's been so little between the state-of-the-art models, the frontier models. It's been a few points here or there, that when this came out on some of the leaderboards, it was a significant step forward on leaderboards that were quite saturated, or on ones that have a long way to go. They were really pushing things forward. LM Arena, they were smashing the competition. So it's certainly been well received. My initial play with the models has been very good, both in the API and the Gemini chat interface. I've really enjoyed putting some challenging scenarios in it. There's been things like trying to design a complex power automate flow, which is the kind of workflow that the models generally aren't very good at working with. The only time I've had any decent responses is from ChatGPT 5 Pro. Gemini 2.5 wasn't really very good at understanding some of the mechanics of power automate, whereas I found with Gemini 3 Pro, it did an excellent job of getting into the detail of how to automate a particular workflow.
Yeah, I mean, if we take a look at some of the evals, the Humanities Last Exam, Gemini 3 Pro with code execution got 45.8%, and the previous high was 26.5, which was GPT 5.1. So that's a pretty big leap. Another one that jumped out to me was an eval called Screen Spot Pro, which is basically AI's ability to understand a computer screen. The previous high on that was Claude Sonnet at 36%. Gemini 3 does 72% on that eval. That's important, right, for computer use by agents. So that's kind of interesting. The Vending Bench 2 eval, it has the highest score so far. So for listeners that are not familiar with this, basically the AI is briefed to run a vending machine business, and it has to like buy supplies, control pricing, deal with customer complaints and stuff like this, and basically try and make money. So it nearly, probably not doubled, but maybe 50% greater than the previous benchmark score. And that one's really interesting because it's much more closer to the world of real work, right? Rather than some of the other evals, which maybe get a bit esoteric. The criticism of all the evals is that once you know how the evals work, you can overfit the model in post-training. So again, you have to take a lot of this stuff with a pinch of salt perhaps, but it is interesting to see them massively increase. And I was listening to the Moonshots podcast with Peter Diamandis, Martin, and the team on the podcast were talking about how we are drifting to a world where the evals that are going to be the most meaningful are really business outcome oriented, measured more in dollars like Vending Bench than in particular scores or percentages like completion percentages. So definitely better. My own personal experience has been it seems more thoughtful and knowledgeable to interact with. It's much better at self-critique. Its writing quality is a slight improvement, although I'm still not absolutely convinced that the models are getting much better at writing. We'll talk about Opus in a minute, but that's probably the best one I've seen so far. And then GPT 5.1 is better than GPT 5. So there's a bunch of nuances in there. But is there anything you've been doing with Gemini 3 particularly that you're getting good results on?
Yeah, there was one particular project that I'd been struggling with, needed a front end that tapped into a few government APIs for property data, things like planning information, zoning, things like that. And I tried a few different tools. They took me 90% of the way there, but there were some nuances in the way that things would render on the map. But Google Gemini one-shotted it. It was really powerful. It used the same prompt that I'd used elsewhere, and quite literally it one-shotted the output. So yeah, I was very impressed to see that improvement in the model.
Been very good at spinning up front ends, isn't it? We've talked previously about, for marketers, moving beyond content as lead magnets and thinking about tools that you might build for your target audience that you would not have spent money on a developer on, but if an AI can spin it up. So as these things mature and improve, and Gemini 3 is definitely one to try if you've been thinking about building tools and the other AIs have not been quite good enough, or you haven't had confidence because you thought you'd have to get in them, like wrangle the code yourself, it's definitely worth playing with Gemini 3 from that perspective. The other thing I've been testing this weekend is I've been running quite a lot of deep research reports. And it's been interesting. In the past, I've kind of got similar things. Like if I've run against like GPT 4.0 against Gemini 2.5, I get a report that was by and large talking about the same stuff. But they're starting to diverge a bit, which is interesting. I ran Gemini 3 Pro against GPT 5.1 Deep Thinking this weekend. And somewhat surprisingly to me, 5.1 was better than Gemini Pro in terms of clarity of expression, depth of ideas, number of sources cited. Like it really did seem to do a much better job. So yeah, I really thought when Gemini 3 came out, like it would just become my obvious go-to, but I'm not so sure that's going to turn out to be the case, if I'm honest. I think I'm still going to use GPT 5.1 and other models for stuff.
That chimes with my general experience with the Gemini chat experience and ChatGPT. I still find, despite model improvements across the board, my daily driver, the app that is open on my desktop at all times, is ChatGPT. They have just got the user experience down in a way that Google Gemini just doesn't quite have refined yet. But interestingly, Logan Kirkpatrick from the team has said that they are doing a big 2.0 relaunch of the UX coming soon.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that entails. I mean, one of the cool things about Gemini is they're starting to play with spinning up like dashboards and interactive experiences as part of the answer. We've talked previously, and I think it's pretty well discussed in the industry at this point, that UX on demand is probably going to be how AIs work. Like sometimes it'll give you an answer in text if that's the most appropriate, but maybe it'll create images. Interesting thing is Gemini 3 is much better. It goes out on the web and it tries to find images that will support its point, and it intersperses them in the answer. And for me, on a couple of occasions, it even created images, which was super interesting, and they actually worked. And I'll give you an example. I think the advice turned out to suck, but I was, it's time for us to buy a new mattress. So I've been using Gemini 3 to help me find this new mattress. So we bought a new mattress, but the delivery time is 6 weeks, and I'm getting a bad back from the current mattress. So Gemini 3 gave me a bunch of recommendations about what I should do. One of them was to put a yoga mat under the dip in the mattress, which I think is actually terrible advice, but there's a number of different ways you could orientate that, and it wasn't quite clear to me. So I was like, can you draw an image that demonstrates this? And it came up with a beautiful image that absolutely made it clear what its advice was. And that's a new capability as far as I'm aware. But this probably ties into potentially even more exciting part of Gemini release, which is the improvements to Nano Banana image gen model. Have you had a chance to play with that?
I have. So this is quite a step on from Nano Banana. This is, again, for anyone that isn't aware of the differences, Google has Imagen, which is a diffusion-based image generation model. The clarity of those images is very good, but it isn't isn't native within the large language model Gemini itself. And that meant that getting edits of a design is quite tricky. So every time you created an image with it, it was creating a brand new image. Whereas with Nano Banana, when they launched that within 2.5 in the previous release, suddenly we could upload images and get very detailed, very accurate edits created to images. Well, now they're talking about Nano Banana Pro being a foundational image model, which has almost a world model baked inside it. So it understands so much more context about the image. So you can ask it to do tasks, not just like, add a hat to this dog or something silly like that, but you can actually ask it to isolate elements of the image or to mask certain parts of the image, to turn the image into a line drawing. You can ask it you can even use it within video, where you can put an image of, say, a mouse stuck in a maze, and ask it to animate the mouse running through the maze, and it will accurately one-shot it. And this, when it's linked with, or Nano Banana Pro, when linked with something like VO3, opens up a whole world of amazing possibilities with visual work. It's not just creating things, but explaining, solving, editing, reasoning. There's so many possibilities that are unlocked with it.
I think the system card for this is quite illustrative, and it's got some bits in it that feels like a tipping point. So the first thing, you can now provide, I think it's up to 5 characters as prompt images. So I could put, pictures of you and me and a couple of a agency gang from the HubSpot inbound days, and ask Nano Banana to start creating a bunch of unlikely scenarios for us to be in. And rather than maintaining character consistency for just one person, you could do it for more, which is really interesting. It can also do the same with up to 14 objects, which again seems a very bizarre number. Like 15, it's going to break. 13, safe. 14, on the edge. But again, if I wanted to control that scene even more, I could actually add a load of objects to the scene, and then it would put them all in the right places, which is pretty astounding. And I think what we may see, I suspect this won't be the model, but the next one will be, is a genuine image creation capability, where if you're a marketer and you need to do a bunch of product images in different settings, or you're even trying to come up with like brief videos for those, because obviously you can use the image generation capabilities, and then you can ask Veo to turn those into video for you, is we can, as marketers, actually start to now create product imagery, right? Give it a product shot and then use it as you see fit. Put it on the moon, give it wings flying in space, like, you know, whatever you can imagine, really. And up until now, that's been a bit hit and miss. But this model feels like the one that's more consistently capable. So are we drifting, therefore, to a post-Canva Adobe world? Probably not for specialists. People who are really good at creating images are probably still going to create things much better than you can just do in Nano Banana. But yeah, if you're just creating quick product imagery, I wonder, you know, and you could probably semi-automate this with MCP, or so there's probably some quite interesting things you could do that you just couldn't do with image models until now.
There's definitely been a shift in people's willingness to accept and to use publicly AI-generated images. I'm seeing it in posters, in shop windows. I'm seeing it for flyers, for events. I was on an e-commerce website this weekend, and there was just something about the text that made it very clear to me it was a GPT-4 or GPT-5 generated image. It had that kind of softness to it that was very recognizable. So we're certainly seeing this more and more in the public, even though in some domains, people are still very anti-AI. I don't know if you saw this recently, but there's some pushback against Steam in the video game industry. Steam tag games if they use AI-generated content, and some developers are pushing back against that tag and that label.
Yeah, I think the big issue there, I read that story, it was an interesting one. I think the big issue is everybody in the games development industry is probably using Gen AI in one way or another. So is it even a meaningful tag? I think that's probably quite a big issue. I thought you were going to say the Coca-Cola TV ad, which has been AI generated and it's triggered a bit of a backlash. It's better than last year's ad. It still looks a bit weird in places. I saw it on TV over the weekend.
I saw somebody do a breakdown of the different lorries that are in different truck, and they took the bodies of them and turned them into a diagram. And apparently there's 14 different truck bodies used in that.
Yeah, I looked at that and I thought, old tech.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know how long they've been working on that as much as they've got AI. I think I read somewhere that there was still like ridiculously large amounts of people who worked on that project, drifting towards 100, which for me, I'm like, why are you using Gen AI then? But the reality is, I think I could spin up something better in an hour with Nano Banana 2 and Veo 3.1. So that just makes me think it's old tech, and next year's will probably be quite a bit better than that. There may even be like rules on what models, maybe they have to use open source models, you know, Coca-Cola's a big corporate and what have you. So yeah, I'm not so sure, but yeah, I think you're right. I think attitudes are changing. I mean, my wife was showing me stuff on Instagram this weekend, and we were trying to guess how many of the videos were AI generated, and I reckon 4 out of 5 that we were looking at were AI generated. It was cats doing stuff that there's no way you get a cat to do, and you know you've got a technology acceleration when one of the first use cases is always cat. I mean, that's how the internet began. Look at these funny pictures of cats, and now we've got funny pictures of cats, but they're AI generated. So that in itself is a bit worrying, because it's so much of a deluge of absolute crap, but like some of them are kind of funny. I saw one where the cats are doing like work around the house, like trying to fix like electric switches and fix cars and stuff like that. It was kind of funny, but yeah, I think it's the explosion we've been talking about is well underway. Let's shift gears. Let's talk Claude, because Gemini 3 was like basking in its glory for all of about a week, probably less, because Claude had been cooking Opus 4.5. So quick reminder for the audience, because none of these AI companies make it easy to track what these different things mean. So Anthropic's Claude is obviously not as popular a model as ChatGPT and Gemini, but still popular, especially among coders. And they have 3 flavors. They've got Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus, which approximately is also the scale and size and capability of the model. So Haiku is the least capable, very cheap to run. Sonnet's in the middle. Opus is a big gargantuan model that's very expensive to run. And the thing that was super interesting this week is Opus 4.5 came out. Sonnet 4.5 is already out. So it's the big brother version. And it's actually still quite cheap to run also compared to, like, in general, the Opus models are very, very much more expensive to run than the Sonnet models, but this one, not so much. And some people have been loving it online. What have you seen as it relates to Opus 4.5, Martin?
Yeah, so it came out swinging on the benchmarks again on agentic coding. So the SWE benchmark, it scored 80.9 versus Gemini Pro's 76.2. On agentic terminal coding, it scored 59.3 versus Gemini Pro's 54.2. They had graduate level reasoning. This was an interesting one. So the GPQA Diamond test, which is PhD level research questions, scored 87 versus Gemini Pro's 91.9. So not quite state of the art there. But generally speaking, we are talking about a very, very capable model across the board. My personal experience with it is I'm just pleased that they've increased the limits. One of the big criticisms with Anthropic's policy for a subscriber, whether you are on Pro or the Plus plan or whatever it is for $20 a month, or you are on one of their max plans for $100 or $200 per month, the limits on Opus were laughably small. It had become a bit of a meme that you would put in one question and that would be you done for a month. But now they've opened up to max plan users. They've given you the same limits that you had for Sonnet 4.5. And this model is really, really smart and really good. So I've been playing around with it for some strategic development, and it adds a bit more finesse to Sonnet. For coding, I've only lightly tested it at this moment using Claude Code for a couple of projects, but looks really good, really very capable.
Yeah, I think it's quite cool. I think the thing that struck me here, and there's a little bit of trying to infer what the major labs are doing. My understanding, stop me if I'm wrong, mine, is when we see these like number increments, GPT-5 becomes GPT 5.1, is if we go from, GPT-5 to GPT-6, it's because there's been another training run and a fundamental new model has been created. And then it goes through all the fine-tuning, reinforcement-based fine-tuning and all that other stuff. And then we have our new model. Whereas if it goes up in incrementation, 5 to 5.1, it's because they've maybe further fine-tuned the model or made some changes in the back end that change its personality or how it, basically thinks and produces outputs. So you look at Gemini 3, that one assumes is a new training run, a new model that was trained in a different way, more data, whatever, and is therefore significantly better than Gemini 2, 2.5, whatever. Opus 4.5 is not a new model, and yet it has these capabilities that outstrip Gemini 3 in a number of areas, which for me is interesting because it suggests that the innovation in the fine-tuning and the reinforcement-based learning and whatever they're doing in post-training to improve model outputs can actually have quite a big impact on what the models can do. So I find that quite interesting because in the beginning we were like, need a new model release. But then obviously we got the O models from ChatGPT, from OpenAI, which could think. They took some time before they gave an answer, and that gave us a big leap. And I think there's something special in here. They've done something with Opus's ability to think and produce good outputs that's not based on just throwing the kitchen sink of data at it. It's something else.
Yeah, and that really comes through in the token usage. So I don't know if you saw this from the report. They gave it some puzzles, a series of challenges, an escape room challenge, and they gave that challenge to Sonnet 4.5 as well as Opus 4.5. And they gave them the ability to use advanced tools. So Opus 4.5 is exceptionally good at function calling or being able to use tools like web search or code execution, things like that. And it was able to solve the problems using far fewer tokens. I think this is really interesting for developers, or when we start to think about what this means in real world applications within business. If you've got long time horizon tasks that people need to execute, you don't want it burning through huge amounts of tokens, costing you a great deal of expense. Whereas this new model is doing exactly what you'd want. It's optimizing. So the amount of tokens that it was using was substantially less. So just to bring this to life, software engineering with effort controls, Opus 4.5 was achieving around 81% accuracy with around 12,000 tokens being used, whereas Sonnet 4.5 was achieving 77% accuracy using 22,000 tokens. So it was using double the tokens and it was less accurate.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think this is what makes Opus 4.5 interesting. It's in the nuances. There's another thing in the system card. One of the benchmarks involves being a customer service agent bot, like chatbot, that solves a customer's problem. And in one of the cases, Opus 4.5, it failed the test because it didn't give the outcome expected. But what it actually did is found a really creative way to deliver on the customer's requirements based on the sort of knowledge base of information. It worked out how to give the customer what the customer wanted by effectively exploiting a loophole in how the particular service, in this case, it's changing a flight booking. So it failed the test, but because it was too creative and it did something that was not spec'd, that maybe a human wouldn't have even known how to do. And that, again, that's the first time this type of thing's come up. And then there was one other thing where Claude administers a sort of homework test to new developers that apply to work at Anthropic. And for the first time, Opus 4.5 gets a higher score on average than the humans who take that test. And so if you're watching for things like recursive improvement in the capability of agents, well, here's a pretty strong indicator that Opus 4.5 is probably at that capability where it's able to pass tests that a high-end developer would probably be administered. So what else can it do? And then the final thing I really liked is there's an implication that Opus is very good at managing other models. So its ability to act as an orchestrator. And this is important, right? We talked on a previous episode about different trigger points for what the future of marketing, business, and life looks like. And one of those trigger points is agent models that can manage other agent models, both in terms of expanding their capabilities, but also then you can create niche agents that are very good at a certain thing, like writing social media posts, and an orchestrator agent that's like a strategist that knows when to deploy those agents and can verify and validate that their work is good. And it looks like Opus 4.5 is very good at delegating to Haiku 4.5. Haiku, very cheap, very fast to run, very low latency. So again, one of those trigger points has potentially been reached that we talked about on a previous episode, whereby you might have a campaign planning agent that is Opus 4.5 and execution agents that are being driven by Haiku. Imagine what Opus 5 and Haiku 5 are going to be able to do if this is what 4.5 can do.
All of this is now available across the major cloud platforms as well. So this was a big announcement that Anthropic have signed a deal with Microsoft Azure. So it's available on Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud Platform for the first time. Interestingly, Anthropic models are now available in Microsoft Copilot as well. So that's a big change. If you're a Copilot 365 user and you've always been using the baked in Microsoft models, or you've clicked on the try GPT-5, well, now Claude has also been unlocked and made available. However, if you do use Anthropic, that does actually use Anthropic servers. So I'm aware that there are some governance issues. It does take the information outside of your tenant at the moment.
That's super interesting because word on the street, and revenue figures would potentially back this up, says it's enterprises that are favoring Claude, especially when it comes to coding use cases, which makes perfect sense. And so finding more and more ways to put their models in enterprise level software, obviously getting it into Google Workspace is going to be tricky, but Microsoft is the fair game route to market because they don't have their own models. So I think that's kind of interesting. Last bit of model news this week was DeepSeek's open source model there's like a fine-tuned version. Is it 3.2 they're up to? I can't remember. Anyway, this model managed to get gold on the IMO Math Olympiad. So it was big news a couple of months ago that Google and OpenAI were able to achieve gold on these really super hard math problems that most people would find too hard to do, which is impressive. We in the market don't have access to those models yet. I'm sure they'll come to us soon, but especially now there's an open source model that can get those level of results. So I expect that Google and OpenAI will need to release access to their smarter models soon. And B, open source models, you can see the weights, you can further fine tune them. This is a very smart model for open source community to be able to get their hands on. What are your thoughts on this one, Mike?
Just goes to show that the frontier is moving across closed and open models, and I think the competition is hot. Does lead me to a thought that ultimately models are going to be commoditized in the not too distant future.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Definitely the moats of user base are going to be critical. I mean, Sam Altman issued a war-footing internal memo, didn't he, at the same time as all this happening, to say, guess what? ChatGPT and OpenAI, we have some real hardcore competitors now, and we are going to have to, really push hard to make sure that we stay ahead of the game and stay relevant, because whatever gap there was between OpenAI and the rest of the market appears to be dissolving pretty darn quickly. And they are now well and truly in the race to try and stay at the top of the leaderboards and usability. Fortunately for them, they have managed to accrue a large number of users, which is going to be critical for them to remain in. But, for me now, because we're a Google Workspace company, and having a strong Gemini model is very, very handy for me. Like, if I had to choose, honestly, I'd rather Gemini just gets better and better, because it's just, all my data is already in Google. It just makes my life super easy. I don't really want another platform that can access my data like OpenAI and ChatGPT. So, I think they're under pressure.
They are, and that was further compounded by HSBC putting out a report this week saying that they think by 2030, OpenAI will still be cash flow negative, leaving a $207 billion funding shortfall.
Yeah, growth required. Revenue growth required. But I think something that's in the, definitely active conversation is this a bubble, right? Is all the money flowing into AI going to burst? And you certainly won't find any financial and investing advice on this podcast. But one of the key retorts to that would be supply and demand. And this feeling that intelligence baked into so many areas, we don't have the data centers and the compute to serve even the amount of intelligence we want now. You talked about earlier not being able to get access to enough Claude to meet your needs. Some of that's because compute is expensive, but some of it's because it's limited. And they're having to ring fence compute for inference, which is when we all use the model. That's called inference when it gives us outputs. But they need to keep some model back for training. Some compute back for training, and I think that's probably proving a difficult balance. So when we start to look like we are meeting demand and starting to gain a surplus in compute, I don't know, that would probably be quite an interesting sign. Do you have any thoughts on that, Martin?
Leads me to, a story that we've got later on in the pod, really, which is about how much work can be automated. In fact, I think we should maybe skip ahead to this story now. McKinsey put out a report saying that AI can now automate 57% of US work. And in the report, they don't talk about it being about the eradication of jobs. They say what's required is a reimagining of workflows and the kind of operations that we do and how we do them is required. And I think that's the key thing here. These models are currently underutilized. Most of the productivity gains at the moment are seen by people having chats with the chatbot. In fact, Anthropic did a report this week about that very thing. They found that they tried to estimate how much productivity was being driven through people using chatbots. They found that they think 80% of workflows are being completed by the AI, or the time reduction is an 80% time saving where people use a chatbot in their workflow. But that's still in the chat UI domain, right? That's still people using the assistant to go back and forth. Whereas when you build workflows where data and processes are being fully operated by an AI, we can remove the need for that. And we haven't got to that point in the economy just yet. So I think that's where we're heading, and that's where the compute demand will come from. If they're going to see the gap in cash flow, that 207 billion, if that's going to be bridged, they're going to need companies to rebuild entire workflows and replace entire work streams with AI.
Yeah, I'm still finding this quite hard to predict, and almost to marry up what a lot of these reports say and a lot of my own personal experience. And I think one of the dangers is actually, and you and I have talked a lot about the early productivity gains that we saw, right? Dictating everything rather than typing doubles my speed instantly. And it doesn't need complex thinking models. In fact, the best thing that's happened to me in the last 3 or 4 months is having access to NVIDIA's transcription model, which is near real time, because now I don't have to wait for it to output, and I can make edits quicker and blah, blah. So there's this weird thing about humans that we absorb these changes pretty quickly, and then we're like, right, what next? And if I really step back from my workflow, I would have to really still reflect on how much faster I'm able to do so many of my work tasks, like producing content, writing emails, just generally communicating with my team, writing strategic plans, thinking through those plans and looking for gaps in them that, to be honest, I'm not sure I would have done if I didn't have a thinking partner to use. So it's hard to say. I mean, in that report, the Anthropic they predicted that it was reducing task completion time by 80%, which is pretty significant. But at the same time, they only predicted that they could increase productivity to 1.9%, or 1.8% annually over the next decade, which is a long time to get up to that point, which is double the current productivity growth, right? But it's still, I'm sure it's meaningful at the level of countries and GDPs.
Yeah, macro, it's substantial, right?
But it's like, you can do this task 80% faster, you can do twice as much work in a day, and so I predict productivity growth to go from 1% to 1.8%. I don't know. It feels like something's missing in that. It's probably a maths and statistics question. And like I say, I can still imagine that at country level, that is significant. But yeah, I'm struggling to reconcile all of that, because at the same time, you've got reports of work slop. So it's like, yeah, you're 80% faster. The outputs were shit and unusable. Oh, okay. Well, now that's meaningless.
They did refer to that in the article as well, though. They did say that it didn't take into account time spent validating the outputs from the models.
And important.
Are people even doing that?
Well, there's another report that came out that we're going to talk about as well. And in part of that report, let's move on to that now quickly. Before we do, the other thing I think it has to be taken with a pinch of salt on some of these reports is McKinsey predicting that, what was it, 7% of US work could be automated with current tools alone? Question mark. I'm not so sure about that. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Are you saying that McKinsey isn't the oracle, isn't wholly reliable? No, I think the major consultancies, they're so enterprise focused. I think they get things wrong frequently enough, but they'll just put out another report in 6 months' time saying something new, and it gives people like us something to talk about on a podcast.
I agree. I think the punchline to that report is 57% of tasks can be automated, or whatever the statement was, ... And if you just contact McKinsey, we'll help you realise those gains. Do you know what I mean? We also, Martin and Paul also offer consulting and training to help you realise the gains of AI. So I'm completely on board with the concept that we can help you automate 57% of the work that your humans do. I just doubt that that's going to be possible in the near to midterm, because processes are messy. They haven't been designed for AI. Humans bring a lot of creativity, ingenuity, problem solving, and experience-based understanding of context that I just don't see in any AI models yet. That is going to have to significantly improve before we can get anywhere near the number that McKinsey's saying here, as far as I'm concerned. But what about this Gartner report as well? Got another report in the mix.
Yeah, so this one was the strategic predictions for 2026, and AI is peppered throughout. But there were just a couple of insights that I thought were worth bringing to the discussion table, Paul. So one of their predictions is that we will see a surge of lazy thinking. So the prediction is through 2026, atrophy of critical thinking skills due to generative AI use will push 50% of global organizations to require AI-free skills assessments. So basically putting people through skills assessments where they are not allowed to use Gen AI as an assistant or a tool. So the ability to think independently and creatively will become both increasingly rare and increasingly valuable.
Can we double click on that one for a moment? Because I think this is a big deal. To stress, this Gartner report is a bunch of smart people sitting in a room going, if this happens, then this will happen, then this will happen. That's a prediction, rather than it being very like super data based and analysis based, as far as we can tell. Doesn't mean that these predictions are not interesting and valuable, but it's important context, right? I think this is a thing. Like I have to work so much harder to keep my critical thinking brain engaged now than ever before, because why not work with your thinking assistant to help outsource some of your thinking, right? That's kind of the point in many cases. And yet, in a world of AI hallucinations, critical thinking has never been more important. So, but I see it atrophying in myself if I'm not careful. And I think humans are very good at finding a route to an outcome that requires the least energy possible on their part. I don't think it's conscious. I think it's subconscious. And so I think this is a real danger.
I wholeheartedly agree. And this is very real and very manifest in one particular domain that I'm associated with. So peer reviews of journal papers. It's rife with people trying to prompt inject, where people have put notes in their paper submissions to the AI reviewer to give them positive reviews. And clearly there are people out there doing peer reviews where they're throwing it into Claude and saying, what do you think of this? Give feedback on this paper. Now, I do peer reviews for the Applied Marketing Analytics Journal, and I have to make sure that, well, my approach to this is I'll always read the paper first. I will formulate my own ideas. I will write my first draft, but I do run it through an AI as well. But I have to make sure that I've done that after I've read the paper and done the thinking first. It's a fascinating process to go through, I think, reviewing with an AI assistant. And if you do it the other way around, you're so biased to what you've just been told. Like if you were to throw it in and it says, oh, these are the things that are good or bad. Whereas I'll bring my own thoughts to the table and then kind of run it through and do a collaborative review. And going through that process enables me to go, actually, no, that's not a valid concern. And there are a few points that I try not to be over reliant on it, but there are definitely things where feedback I've taken from a prompt, an AI and gone, actually, that's a valid piece of criticism or feedback that I'd overlooked. But there's, I would say 50% of the feedback, if it's just left to its own devices, is irrelevant and not valid. But there must be armies of people out there that are doing this journal reviews and feedback that are literally just throwing it in, becoming incredibly lazy, outsourcing their thinking entirely. And it is a problem, as we've discussed previously with the rise of work slop.
Yeah, let's just break that down quickly, because I think it's such a critical point. And it's almost a philosophical point, which is it your job to look for gaps in the AI's thinking, Or is it the AI's job to help you look for gaps in your own thinking? And ultimately, the biggest factor that I think is going to drive this is workloads and time pressure. Now, do you know anyone, Martin, whose workload is so easy and their time pressure is so easy that they're going to take the hard route and the slow route, or they're going to take the fast route and the easy route? Most people are under crazy amounts of time pressure. I mean, for me, the overwhelming trend of the last 15 years is how much more work can a single person do if we just keep throwing stuff at them. Like, it's very easy to forget what it was like when we didn't have all of our work on our mobile phones constantly, and you could be checking a Google Doc at 9 p.m. at night and rattling off a Slack message. That's not how life used to be. And so I can absolutely see people default into this, probably because they'll be like, I'm sure it will be okay. And in some cases, it absolutely will be. But we often get asked, especially by parents of kids that are maybe like 18 to 25, what should they do, right? What should their kids do? And that level of critical thinking skill is going to be so, so, so important. Your ability to call a model out for getting stuff wrong, or for being able to provide interesting ideas that models wouldn't come up with, I think is where some of the magic really lies. And it reminds me of my academic career. Like, working as an academic scientist is really thrilling in some ways and brutal in others, because basically the training is, let's all get very good at pulling each other's work apart, because we're in the pursuit of truth here and egos can't be involved. We have to destroy everybody's work looking for the holes. And of course, egos very much are involved because we're all humans. And that's not an easy process for most people to go through. It certainly wasn't easy for me, because every meeting is a bunch of smart people trying to find all the gaps. But that for me is probably one of the most important parts of the pursuit of scientific progress. It takes a lot of training and a big mindset shift and a lot of energy to get your brain to operate like that. But I think everyone in a business context that uses AI is going to have to think like that. Until we are absolutely confident that AI tools can validate and critique their own outputs better than any human, that is our job. And it is honestly a super hard job, as you've just described in that peer review process.
Yes. Well, that's not the only prediction they made in this Gartner report. There were a few other interesting things as well. And when thinking about critiquing and making decisions and using good judgment, that's something that people have to do in B2B procurement quite often. And one of the big predictions that they made is by 2028, 90% of B2B buying will be AI agent intermediated, pushing over $15 trillion of B2B spend through AI agent exchanges. So they say that procurement's being reprogrammed, not by policy, but by invisible agents. Traditional search engine optimization and PPC will give way to agent engine optimization. Products will need to be machine readable, and procurement will shift to efficient, autonomous, machine-to-machine transactions.
Yeah, this is a big deal if you're a marketer. We've talked about this before, Martin, right? In terms of humans marketing to humans, then humans marketing to agents, and then agents marketing to agents. And what do those shifts look like? And, what do you need to do? It's super interesting. I renegotiated my satellite TV package this week. And it won't surprise you to know that I asked GPT 5.1 and Gemini 3 to go and find what the current prices were, give me a strategy for renegotiating my contract, and also like little tips and tricks to like out negotiate the humans that I was going to be dealing with. And I got a really good deal on my satellite TV contract. I didn't do much of the thinking. Oh, sorry, I outsourced it on this occasion. But I was going through the process thinking it would be really good if ChatGPT could have just called, because I had to spend 40 minutes on the phone. So it would have been really good if ChatGPT could have just called the provider and taken care of that with me, which from a capabilities perspective, it has those capabilities now. And the reward function is get the lowest price possible. Like, it's not a hard thing to brief. So I was like kind of frustrated that we're not quite there yet. But at the same time, if AI followed the playbook it gave me, which is all I really did, it probably would have got me a really good deal as well. So yeah, I think that's definitely one for us marketers to chew on, especially in a world where, we're all going to have personal assistants to take care of this stuff for us.
Absolutely. And I think the big takeaway from this in the near term, in terms of what can we do with this information right now, is I think marketers need to think about making sure that their product documentation is machine readable. For me, this is such an important point. So much information is still held, particularly in the B2B world, on PDFs. And I just think we need to make sure that we're transitioning all of that content away from PDFs into markdown files or some sort of machine readable format, and making that publicly available so that the models can easily access, understand it. Data that's captured within tables is really hard to parse out for a model when it's stored in a PDF. But stick that into Markdown and all of a sudden it's very easy for the AI to understand. So without getting too technical, you can quite easily start making this transition to be in a good position for agentic assisted B2B procurement by just turning your data into Markdown files.
Yeah, super interesting. There's a couple of things while you're talking that spring to mind. The first one is there's a continuum of possibilities here. One of them is we create information experiences for agents. So humans visit websites, but if your website has identified that it's a bot from ChatGPT, it's actually pushed off to a completely separate information repository that it gathers the information from, because websites are humans, obviously, in terms of how they're laid out and what have you, and PDFs are not particularly helpful, and gated PDFs and all this other stuff that agents aren't going to be able to access. So that's one possibility. The other end of the spectrum is computer use becomes so good so quickly that if you embark on this digital change project to reimagine how you provide your products and services to agents, and then, oh crumbs, 9 months later, Opus 5 can actually just browse your website and read PDFs. And, so it's like, this is, I think Ethan Mollick talks about this. This is one of those weird technological evolutions that's happening so quickly. There can sometimes be a strategic advantage to being a laggard, right? It's like, let's just let the technology catch up, because by the time we've put all the effort into this, technology will be able to just do it anyway. So it was a wasted couple of $1 million on a digital transformation project that we didn't need to do. I'm not saying that's true, by the way. It's just that's one possibility, right? So that I do find myself thinking about, how proactive do we need to be? I mean, do you have an opinion on this, Martin?
If thinking about optimizing for computer use, if anything has taught me how difficult computer interface design can be, it's being in marketing agency world for the past 15 years, doing web design projects and trying to make these interfaces consistent across different browsers. Oh, it works in Chromium, but it doesn't work in Firefox. Do you know what? A Markdown file is a Markdown file. It contains all of the information. It's very simple. And I think taking a surefire approach to just make sure there is a format to get the essential information out there is fail-safe. Whilst, yes, the Opus might be able to use your website in the not too distant future, how long till some stupid JavaScript framework comes along where it can't do what you want it to do? I'll give you a good example, actually, with when I was using, which browser was it? It was Perplexity. It was the Comet browser. And I was trying to get it to do a task, and it ultimately completed the task. I was trying to get it to organize an inbox using Outlook online. And it was able to do nearly everything except there's an interface element, which is right click. But the model can't right click. It can only ever left click select. So this particular function that needed you to be able to right click to add a new folder, it couldn't do, and it had to find another way around, which it did successfully do. But if that other route didn't exist, that interface is bust, right? And I think the web and UIs are full of these edge cases, which will ultimately catch computer use agents out from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, but I think it's probably inherently quite fixable as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, one experiment I would love to run, if I had a product-based business, like an e-commerce-based business, I'd probably like look at my products that get the most web traffic, or, you know, my most successful products. And I'd experiment with trying to find a way of providing that type of easily parsable, markdown driven information, perhaps on a product page, in a way that encouraged an AI crawler to use that information in a way that a human wouldn't. Like, I don't know if you could just hyperlink in the text his for his AI readable markdown, or just something that a human wouldn't click, or if they did, like, fine, but it won't be much use to them.
I would expect that it will become the norm within a CMS, actually, to almost like in email marketing systems, where you have the plain text version, where you'll create a markdown version of a web page, and that will exist as a kind of parallel page that you never see, but in the page schema, like in the metadata of the page, it gives a link to the markdown version of that page. And that's how I would imagine CMSs in the future will operate. They'll create this other version in the background, and the crawler will go to the page, it will see the schema and go, right, that's where I need to look for the information, rather than passing through all of this HTML.
That makes perfect sense, especially given, I can't remember what it's called, and this is baked into platforms like HubSpot because it's fairly old school at this point, but the ability to show a mobile optimized version of a page that's completely stripped down. I can't remember what it's called now. Yeah, AMP, right? So HubSpot will do that automatically for all of your blog posts, server an AMP version if someone's on a mobile and their speed is slow or whatever. I think you're absolutely right. I can absolutely imagine that happening. Makes perfect sense to do so. I think the other thing it may force us all to do, and this harks back to a friend of ours, Marcus Sheridan, and his They Ask You Answer methodology for inbound marketing. And for those that are not familiar with Marcus and his work, in essence, I'd summarize it as: provide your buyer with the information they need to make a decision. Don't hold too much back. And one of his big things is providing pricing information. Now, if you sell widgets, you probably do provide pricing information, but there's lots of things in the B2B marketing world and sales world where pricing isn't available on the internet. So the question just becomes, how will an AI agent handle not being able to gather pricing information and comparing that information for different services? And if you are the one website, backend, markdown files, whatever, that does provide that information, will the agent be more likely to lean into you as a recommendation because it can actually give pricing recommendations to the human that asked for the, you know, the purchase report, or able to act? Because if you're an agent, you cannot make a purchase if you don't know the price. And if you're an agent that's optimized to make purchases, does that mean that you just buy from the one website that has pricing information or easy agent transaction capability? All of these things are like predator-prey relationships, that there will be a arbitrage opportunity that lasts for X amount of time, where you're the website that gave pricing in Markdown, and you're the website that made it easy for an agent to transact, and you absolutely cleaned up for the 2 months that it took for the rest of the world to figure out that they need to do that, so that they can also be included in those agent purchases. So there's probably quite a lot of sort of wargaming to be done in this area, to think about how do you stay at the forefront, and is it commercially viable? Like, if you're selling 2 things a month, probably isn't. But if you're like shifting a load of product, like in our industry, you're a consumable and reagent company who might be selling hundreds of thousands of vials per day, absolutely worth looking at that, because it could add up to quite a lot of revenue. I guess somewhat related to this is some of the changes we're seeing in Google AI overviews and potentially in ChatGPT. So Google's starting to place ads in their AI overviews, Martin. Did you see this news?
Yeah, I saw it, and it seems quite linked to the Gemini re-release as well, because they've also announced that as part of search responses, Gemini 3 will actually now create entire interfaces to explain concepts to people as well, which is a fascinating change. So I think that the search experience is evolving at a pace. But yeah, interesting to see that we're seeing the first sponsored links inserted into AI-generated search results of AI overviews. So this is the first monetization strategy that we've seen for the AI search experience. And I think it's fair to say that we'll see more of this inserted into AI mode, as well as AI overviews, which are two distinct product surfaces within the search experience.
It's quite an interesting one. It's absolutely predictable.
Mm-hmm.
How it impacts on user experience is going to be interesting. So I'll tell you a little story. We're doing house renovation at the moment, and I needed to buy because we got a very old house and it's not all served by the central heating system. So I needed to buy an electric radiator. Not something that you do very often, not something I know much about, but I knew what I didn't want, which was a very modern or kind of crappy looking radiator, because our house is quite old and wouldn't be in keeping. And I'd managed to find these cast iron radiators that were electric and oil filled. And they look beautiful. They cost an absolute fortune. I was like, can't justify it. So I asked Gemini 3 to go find me something similar that cost a lot less. And I'd done my own Googling. And it came back with 3 different makes that I hadn't seen that looked basically identical but cost half the price. And we'd been having a conversation about the room size and what type of size of radiator, what type of radiator would you recommend? And it came back with these 3 and it gave me the pros and cons of each and then I said, what would you buy? And it told me which one it would buy. And it had been so darn logical to that point. I bought the one it said. So it raises the question, is it better to have an overt system that says, here's a sponsored link for a thing you could buy that's kind of similar to what you've been chatting with me about? Because I kind of trust Gemini 3, and so I just bought the one it said. And at the moment, that's because I suspect there are no incentives for Google as to what product it recommends. And if I thought there were, maybe wouldn't have been so gullible. But as it stands right now, I just trusted Gemini and bought the one that it said. And so that's kind of interesting, right? Like, how important will it be that we actually have an understanding of how these recommendations get surfaced? Will it influence our buying behavior? Because I was so much more likely to do that than click on a sponsored link and buy the sponsored link. So I don't know how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, that is a fascinating development and goes to show how ads really change the experience. This was something that ChatGPT were quite clear on for a long time, saying that they weren't sure about putting ads into the experience because of the way that people use it, and they want impartial answers. They want to trust the model outputs. Yet we've seen this week speculation arising that ChatGPT is about to get its own ad network and start serving ads in there as well. So yeah, from a marketer's perspective, new ways to reach audiences, right? From an audience perspective, is this going to change the relationship that you have with your chat assistant?
Right. If you had a friend who was like into tech, I've got one, his name's Martin, and he always tries to convince me to buy lifetime deals, and then the software that we buy stops being supported 3 months later. But if you knew that your friend had like...
Sorry, can I just say that feels a bit on the nose, Paul. I feel outed.
I think it would be fairer to say you had a lifetime deal addiction that you then gave to me. And I feel partially cured now. I haven't been burnt a few times. But yeah, if you had a friend who you knew was on commission for every piece of advice they ever gave you, probably wouldn't be your friend anymore. Right? Because that would be a very weird relationship to have. And people have these weird relationships with their AIs. Do they want them selling to them? I think you're absolutely right. I think it changes the experience a lot. I mean, with OpenAI's release of this shopping research feature, where does that sit? Is it impartial advice, or is there like incentives baked into that? It hasn't been made clear as far as I can tell. And we kind of probably do need to know. And I think it's a shame, because I'm quite liking this moment in time where I can ask AI for purchase advice and it gives me great advice. Another thing it found, this is probably too much information, but because I've got this bad back and it's causing me to get calf strains all the time, weird, right? So it recommended that I get these sliders, they're like slippers, that have this amazing cushioning on the bottom that I would never have found myself. It wouldn't have even occurred to me to buy these. I bought them. They're like walking on air. Like, I don't want to wear normal shoes anymore. I would never have bought that. I would never have thought of it. Jury's out on whether or not it's helping with my biomechanical issues or not, but successfully sold me on this pair of these shoes that I absolutely adore now. That's a nice experience. Once it gets tainted with all of this advertising and do I trust it or not, I'm back to having to think for myself again.
It's an age-old problem. A technology or some new thing is launched into the world and we go, this is great. And then the marketers come along and ruin it.
Oh, therein lies a truth, I think. But yeah, I guess from a marketing perspective, seeing as we are those marketers and many of our listeners are also, keeping tabs on how this evolves and how you can best reach your audience is critical. And a little bit like SEO, and we've talked about this a bit in the past as well, there's going to be ways to have your brand show up in AI search results, creating content, being an authority, having your brand mentioned favorably in lots of different areas like reviews and earned media placements and what have you. Or you can just buy your way to the top if you have a business model whereby you can still make good margins if you're paying to reach that audience. And it does feel like we're entering that time of first mover advantage, figuring out how to how to leverage AI assistance to get in front of audiences where the prices are reasonable. I suspect that is another short-lived arbitrage. I think once these become available, I don't think there's anybody who's going to be like they were with Google search ads. No one's sleeping on this. We've talked about this that's why there's such an obsession with answer engine optimization, because people are desperate to be at the forefront of whatever this will be. And it'll be an arbitrage for about 2 weeks probably, but definitely something we all need to keep an eye on.
Well, that neatly brings us on to our final story of the week, which is about Adobe buying SEMrush for $1.9 billion, merging search engine optimization and creative AI and AEO or Geo or whatever you want to call it, all into one platform. What do you think of this?
So one of the platforms we use is SEMrush. And my first thought was, doesn't Adobe often buy things and break them? And I was sad because I've invested time in setting up campaigns and, projects and stuff. And I don't want the tool to suddenly become 10 times more expensive or break a lot because now it's been wrapped into some other thing that has a bunch of capabilities that perhaps I didn't need. So if I'm honest, my first thought was a bit selfish. My second thought was, if they've mostly done this for AEO and they've spent all that money, then Adobe clearly thinks it's going to be really important, or they think their audience, their customers think it's really important to spend so much cash. But what did you think?
Not a user of the product, but I certainly saw the same reaction on LinkedIn of people going, oh, they're going to make it rubbish now. So yeah, I think that's a valid concern shared by many users. I do think it validates the idea of generative engine optimization. If they're moving into this space with a $2 billion acquisition, AI search clearly isn't just a side project anymore. And I think marketers should be investing more into this. Now, we know that AI search is still a relatively small part of the overall market. Google's own data talks a lot about how they've got more people using search more frequently, and actually engagement in the search experience is increasing with people asking longer, more complex questions in there. So I guess part of my thought process is, yes, geo or generative engine optimization is on the rise and something that we should be doing, but what are the generative engines that we should be paying attention to? And is it going to end up just being Google? Are they still going to be the big player with whether it's Gemini, AI mode, AI overviews, or the classic SERPs window? Do all paths ultimately end up leading to Google anyway? Or is ChatGPT going to actually make a significant inroad?
Such an interesting question, because why did I'm not an expert in this, but why did Google win the search engine wars? And we've talked about this previously, how I probably completely misrepresented a fact about how Google could correlate a 100 millisecond increase in delivering the speed of the result to XYZ of traffic or clicks or conversions on ads and what have you. And a really simple, easy to use web page that did one thing. You searched and it found you information on the web. Contrast that with how like Yahoo search looked in the day and was just full of widgets everywhere, and it's probably like make you feel ill just to look at it if you tried to look at it now. So I think it will come down to user experience, but where I think that's really super interesting is user experience in this sense is very broad. Let's imagine that for whatever reason I'm a ChatGPT user and I give it access to loads of stuff about me. Like I want to use the memory feature. I give it access to my email and my calendar. It's somehow makes its way into my messaging app, WhatsApp, whatever. And it knows a ton about me. Maybe it knows my Amazon purchase history, whatever. Its ability to surface things that are genuinely valuable to me, maybe paid for placements, but still things I would actually buy and get value from and want. That's the type of experience that we're looking for now, right? It isn't just about surfacing information. It's about bridging that gap between almost predictive purchase behavior in a way that we haven't been able to, at least to my knowledge, really been able to do through any cookie-based tracking or automation platforms. Like, to get the most access and benefit out of our assistants, we're probably going to let them know a lot about us. And I think that's probably going to be as big a differentiator to the user experience as how messy is the UI and all this other stuff. So I don't know. I mean, Google's well placed because it already has Gmail and calendar, and it has a lot of stuff that people already use for this type of stuff. And obviously it has a lot of data on a lot of people already. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the more the systems know about us, the better. And actually, it's one of the reasons that ChatGPT remains my daily driver as a chat assistant, is because actually the memory function works really well. And there's some features in it that just make the experience feel more useful as a daily driver when I need specialist tasks completing. Like if I'm doing some coding or vibe coding, I'm going to go to Claude. For certain applications, I find Gemini 3 is fantastic and I go to that. But the tool that I use, I would say for 80% of my prompting is still ChatGPT, because they've just got something dialed in. I guess the question is how much of this tool use is actually rolled out across the population at this point. I was with someone last week who just got a new phone and we were talking about Gemini. They'd never used Gemini before in their life. So I told them to open it up and we just tried a few prompts, and all of a sudden they were an AI user, but they'd never used it before and it wasn't on their radar at all. Google stands to win quite significantly if they can get that audience shifted onto using their platform. And I think with the deals that they're doing with Apple through the iPhone tie-up, and obviously the market coverage that they have through Android, they're really, really well placed to clean up here.
And they've run this playbook before, right? They pay billions of dollars a year to Apple to have Chrome or Google search be like but Google search to be the default search on Apple devices and what have you. So yeah, I think that's key. I also think, just while I was listening to you speak there, that if you think about a cookieless world, that didn't actually come to pass quite as it was expected to do. But working in a world of first party data, and maybe it's harder to track people, finding a way to have your audience like volunteer loads of information about themselves and then extremely happy to do it. Like there are people talking with ChatGPT about, dealing with relationship issues with their friends and partners, talking about like their illnesses, feeling, depressed and suicidal, or there's a person at work I really like and how can I get them to like the amount of like personal information that people are sharing with these tools is like way beyond anything that you would ever have done, you know, in a browser. And all of the AI companies are launching their own browsers as well. So I really think that will be the secret, is trying to unlock the promise. I mean, can't remember what the book's called now, but one of the examples it gives for where AI could go is Amazon. And the précis here is Amazon invested in drone technology because they wondered if there would be a time when AI could predict your purchase needs so well that if you could make delivery cost almost close to zero, you could have a drone turn up at someone's house with something that they didn't even know they needed, and they just take it. They'd be like, oh, cheers, Amazon drone for, yeah, it's funny to say that. The toothpaste did run out exactly today. Well played you. And if half of that package you didn't want and the drone took it back, if you got the cost of delivery down to near zero, it didn't matter. But I think one of the reasons that hasn't come to pass is not just because of drone technology, is because predicting what people want is actually still very hard. But this could be one of those things that makes it much easier to predict what people want. And I think, again, that's where the winner comes in, is that predictive ability, not just the UI and all of this other stuff. So I don't know, in B2B marketing, it's probably not something we have to worry about huge amounts. But if you're in B2C, you should be thinking about this.
How long do you think it will be before the AI assistants? You know, at the moment, they all have that... they've got that trait where at the end they'll say, would you like me to turn this into a convenient EDF handout for you? Or would you like me to turn it into a table for you? Or would you like me to do something else? How long is it till they start having conversations with you and just start randomly going, so how much milk have you got left in the fridge? And, you got a toilet bowl in the cupboard?
Yeah, because your fridge said that you're nearly out. But it is a brand that I don't trust, and so because it's got poor cameras inside it. So no, I think that'll definitely happen. I also think there's a world where there's the buying committee of humans. The complex B2B purchase is a buying committee of like 8 humans, and they're like thrashing it out, and you're getting the absolute, camel as a solution designed by a committee. And then all of the assistants of those humans are having like a meta discussion in the cloud, also thrashing out. Well, my human, knowing what I know about my human, I think my human would actually go this way. And it's like, who then ends up making the decisions, and how does that work? I think the humans would probably go, I can't be bothered to be in those meetings anymore. Can we just send all of our assistants off to be the buying committee? We'll get some quite weird purchases then based on that, I would have said.
Well, it's all good though, because Claude 4.5 is very good at being the orchestrator, and Claude Haiku 4.5 will be the purchase executor. So, in Anthropic we trust. Other models are available.
Well, that feels like a pretty good place to close out the podcast. Anything else you wanted to cover this week, Martin?
I think that is plenty.
Well, thanks for your time as always, and I will catch you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to Artificially Intelligent Marketing. To stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, be sure to subscribe. We look forward to seeing you again next week.